Welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of our interview with Dr. Sax. If you missed part 1, be sure to check out last week's episode. Now, let's dive right into part 2. And if you are enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback means the world to me, and I would love to hear your thoughts or ideas for future episodes. Feel free to reach out on Instagram by messaging me or send an email. You can find all my contact information in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in.
A major factor that I address in Girls on the Edge is screens and smartphones and social media. And I think I deserve a lot of credit because the first edition of Girls on the Edge was published in April 2010. Instagram was not launched until October 2010. So I was writing in 2009 and early 2010 about the dangers of social media for girls before Instagram was even a thing.
Before you knew.
Before we had scholarly research. One of the great advantages of being a family doctor is that you are out there. You are seeing kids every day from every possible environment. I mean, we see medical assistance kids from very low-income families. We see kids whose parents own horse farms and have a house in the south of France. So you see the whole range. And so I was seeing early on how toxic social media was. So you just held up the second edition, published in 2020. By the time we got the second edition, we had lots of scholarly research. You didn't have to guess anymore, and it was no longer a matter of intuition. We now have very good scholarly research showing that the more time a girl spends on social media, like Instagram and TikTok, the more likely that girl is to become anxious and or depressed, and now is very well established. Well, that's a huge effect for girls and a much smaller effect for boys. Why? Why is social media so much more toxic for girls than it is for boys? So I met with a researcher who had documented this in her own data and didn't know why. And so she was very interested when I shared with her research conducted by Carol Dweck and her colleagues at Stanford, showing that girls are very ready to believe that other girls are having more fun than they are. Girls are very ready to believe that other girls' lives are more interesting than their own life is. This turns out to be not at all true for boys. Turns out that boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is to other people. And it turns out that girls and boys use social media differently. So a boy and a girl both go to a football game. They both take pictures of the game, but the boy is taking a picture of the game or of the pretty cheerleader at the game. The girl is turning the phone on herself and taking 50 pictures of herself at the game. And then that evening, she's going through the 50 pictures and finding one or two where she's laughing and the kids around her are laughing. And that's what she posts on her Instagram. Here I am at the game. We had a great time. It's a performance. Social media as used by American teens is a performance. There's nothing wrong with a performance. A performance is a show that you put on to entertain or amuse other people. I don't see anything wrong with that. As long as you keep in mind that the performance has to come to an end and you take off your mask and resume your real life. My concern, listening to American girls, so many of them are stuck in what I've come to call the cyber bubble of 24/7 texting and social media. The mask never comes off, and it is exhausting, and it is draining. A boy and a girl both get sick. They both throw up. The boy posts a photo of his own vomit on his Instagram. Girls never do that. A girl would never post a photo of her own vomit on her Instagram, but boys do. Mm-hmm. So imagine a girl, 12, 14, 16 years of age, in her bedroom looking at all the other girls' Instagram. There's Emily at the football game. She's having a blast. There's Madison at the party. She's having a great time. I'm just sitting in my bedroom not doing anything. My life sucks.
Right.
The more time girls spend on social media like Instagram and TikTok, the more likely they are to become anxious and or depressed. That's a much bigger effect for girls than it is for boys. And here are 3 reasons why. First of all, girls are more invested in their photos. If you don't like Jacob's photo of the pretty cheerleader, he doesn't care. But if you don't like Emily's photo of Emily, she's going to take it more personally. The second reason, boys post a much wider range of their lived experience. This boy looking at Jake's vomit is unlikely to want to be Jake. But girls post a much narrower range of their lived experience, the fun stuff, the happy stuff. And third reason, boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is to begin with. So boys are to some degree protected against the most toxic effects of social media. Boys are more vulnerable to the addictive properties of video games, which we can talk about if you like, because that's a major focus of my book, Boys Adrift. But girls are more vulnerable to the toxic effects of social media. And so next week, I'm speaking to parents at a Catholic school in Alexandria, Virginia, the Basilica of St. Mary. It's called evidence-based parenting. So, and I take that very seriously. For every recommendation I make, I provide lots of scholarly research, and I show what the studies are that support this. So how much time is okay for your daughter to be on social media? Jean Twenge, that important researcher I mentioned a minute ago, she and her colleague Keith Campbell did a huge study, gathered data from over 200,000 adolescents. And on the x-axis is time spent on social media. And on the y-axis is the likelihood of becoming anxious or depressed. And there's no rise in that trend line until you get past 30 minutes. So, and she published that study in 2019. And so 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, actually, I was saying to parents, your kid can be on social media up to 30 minutes a day. Evidence-based parenting, because there's no evidence of toxicity until you get past 30 minutes. And after 30 minutes, it's a pretty straight line going on.
Right.
But Jean Twenge published that study in 2019 based on data gathered in 2018. 2018, that's before TikTok. TikTok changed everything. And more recent studies show there's now no safe amount of time for girls. The trend line starts at 0. And so I reached out to Jean Twenge and I said, look, the new data is different from what you published in 2019. And she responded and she said that the evidence now supports a complete ban on social media for kids under 18. I said, wow. Can I quote you? And she said, yes, you can quote me. And of course, John Haidt, new book, The Anxious Generation, just came out #1 on all the bestseller lists. And he endorses a ban on social media under 16. He acknowledges that the evidence would support a ban under 18, but he likes 16. But in any case, what all the researchers agree on, and certainly John Haidt and Jean Twenge, our leading researchers on this topic, certainly agree on, is that no 13-year-old, no 14-year-old, no 15-year-old should be on social media. And that is now, okay, so when I speak next week in Basilica St. Mary, that's what I'll be telling them, because that's what the evidence now supports.
That's the new research.
Social media changed. Social media has changed. It has become more toxic. But where Jean Twenge and John Haidt are deficient, so John Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation, he says, yeah, kids shouldn't be on social media under 16, but he gives parents no tools for how to do this. He doesn't even mention parental monitoring apps. He doesn't seem to be aware of the challenge that a parent is going to face when she says to her 14-year-old, I want you to get off social media. And the 14-year-old is going to say, but all the other kids are on it.
Right.
I'm going to be isolated. I'm going to be an outcast. I'm going to be a loner, and I'm not a loner. I don't want to. And the parent will come back to me and say, well, she totally freaked out, so I couldn't do it. How do you empower the parent to do the right thing? That's where you need my book, if I may be so bold, The Collapse of Parenting.
Definitely.
Because neither John Haidt nor Jean Twenge address that question at all. They are academics at universities. They're not clinicians. They're not working with actual parents. Right. They're reading their studies and making recommendations, but without really understanding what it takes to change behavior in a family. It's a big deal. It's a big ask. But listen, we should move on to boys or something, because we're almost out of time.
Okay, I have one more question about the girls, and then we can do boys, and then we'll wrap it up, because you have too much information that I want to share with my listeners. I know you have noticed too with the girls. I mean, I have 2 girls, and The Halloween costumes have become a lot more skanky. The bathing
Mhm.
suits are shrinking in size. I mean, there's only hardly any fabric anymore. I mean, girls today are really pushed with the notion of revealing your body as a valid means of self-expression. What can we do as parents to help our daughters see that revealing their bodies is not a way of empowering themselves, that they can define themselves by who they are rather than how they look?
Yes. Well, uh, thank you, because obviously you're quoting from some of the
Of
lines that
course, because
I have
I read it all really, really
in
well.
Girls on the Edge, and I talk about how this uh, culture, uh, American popular culture, pushes girls to evaluate themselves in terms of how they look rather than in terms of who they are. And that social media just compounds that. And the whole dating culture of young people now, with the dating apps, is all based on appearance. And the pressure to Photoshop yourself is very great. And when I meet with girls at middle school and high school, we'll have a very frank conversation uh, about Photoshop, and they're not using that app. There's tons of free apps available now
Yeah.
that you can make yourself prettier. It's a fascinating conversation because the 12-year-old girls know all about this, and they have really thought about this deeply, and they know all the pros and all the cons. You can Photoshop yourself and make yourself look a lot prettier than you are, but then when people actually meet you, they'll be like, "Oh, you're not as pretty as you are in your picture." And the way I start the conversation with the girls, you might wonder, "Wait, Dr. Sachs, you're really old man. How can you have this conversation with 12-year-old girls? Why would they even talk to you?" Here's how I start. I share with them, true story, my first book, Why Gender Matters. First edition, 2005, Doubleday. And my editor, Adam Beller, said, "We need a professional picture. You can't send us a picture. You have to go to a professional photographer. Here's where you're going to go. Get your picture taken." So I go to the photographer. This is back in 2005, remember. And the photographer says, "Dr. Sachs, would you like the services of a digitalist?" And I said, "I'm sorry, what's a digitalist?" And they said, "Well, you know about Photoshop. This is way better. We're going to make you younger and more handsome than you actually are." And I said, "Absolutely, go for it." So I was invited to speak at Lauriston, a girls' school in Australia. Actually, you spend a week at Lauriston and other schools in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. And my host, Brian Lamb, and I, of course, exchanged dozens of emails setting up this visit. And I said, "Look, I'm really not good driving on the left side of the road. Could you possibly meet me at the airport?" He said, "Of course, I'll be happy to meet you at the airport." I said, "Okay." Then I sent him another email. "How will you know who I am? We've never met." And we didn't have Zoom back in 2005. We had never done what you and I are doing now. He said, "Well, I've got your book. There's a picture of you on the back cover." I said, "Okay." So you come through passport control and customs and come out into the public area at the Melbourne airport. And you see the families and friends waiting to greet someone. And I see a man holding a copy of my book. I figured this must be Brian Lamb. So I go over to him. And he looked at me. He made eye contact with me, and then he looked away. He's looking at the picture on the back of the book, the Photoshopped picture. And I went over to him and I said, "Excuse me, are you Brian Lamb?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm Leonard Sax." And he looked at the picture and he looked at me, and I could see he wanted to say, "You don't look anything like your picture." He was too polite to say that, but he gave this disappointed sigh. And he said, "All right, let's go." And the girls all laugh. And that's how we get the conversation going, because I gave in to the temptation.
Yes.
And if you can pull up on the internet a copy of the first edition of Why Gender Matters, and turn it around to the back, and see that cover photo, it's a very handsome man. I mean, we're talking like Brad Pitt, handsome, and not black or gray hair, brown hair streaked with gold. Doesn't look like me, though, is the problem. And that's how we get that conversation going, uh, because I get a great laugh from all the girls, and then they'll share their
Yeah,
story
you connect with
because
them.
I connected with them by showing that I gave into that temptation. I haven't done it since, and the photos you'll see in my other books are unretouched, with the flab and the gray hair. Uh, but I did give in back in 2005.
That's a funny story. So now I'm just going to touch on your other book. You really address in that book the effects of video games. I mean, I know
Mm-hmm.
for girls, we have social media is a huge problem, but for boys, the effects of video games is so important. If you can just tell us a little bit why it's so harmful and why do boys get addicted?
Yeah. Again, there are 5 factors driving this epidemic of unmotivated boys and underachieving young men. But one of those factors is certainly video games. And I begin that chapter by quoting Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche talked about der Wille zur Macht, the will to power, and the desire to be in control. Now, all humans have a desire to be in control, but as Nietzsche observed, it's a question of how important that desire is for you. For most girls and most women, having a good friend, being liked, is at least as important as being in control. And if a woman had the option to be the boss at the cost of sacrificing all her friendships and all her relationships, most women wouldn't do it. Most women value friendship and connection and community and relationship above single-mindedly being the boss. But many boys and men value being the boss higher than anything else. And they will happily sacrifice friendship and relationship and romantic relationships in order to conquer. Well, video games understand that. And if you invest the time and the energy, you can be master of the universe. And many boys, not all boys, maybe not most boys, but quite a few boys do have this great desire, this will to power. And schools have completely lost sight of how to motivate boys. Many schools have. I have a chapter on that, how schools no longer understand how to educate boys. And so many boys now regard academic achievement as unmasculine. And the video games know how to capture the boys. That if you invest the time and the energy, you will be master of the universe. And so parents must limit, govern, and guide their son's use of video games. And if you have a son, I hope you will look at that book, and certainly at least that chapter on video games for that evidence-based guidance on how and why to limit and govern and guide your son's use of video games.
Yes, I do have a son, and we follow a lot of protocols to make sure he's only 12, but he doesn't fall into that trap. I completely agree with you. Well, Dr. Sax, it's been incredible, and I think I can talk to you for hours. To sum up, parenting is a challenging responsibility. It's a role we have chosen, and our children depend on us for more than basic care. They require our attention, consistent discipline, and wisdom. They must feel our guidance and support, knowing we're there to nurture their independence and foster their confidence as they grow into adulthood. Today, as Dr. Sax reminded us, it's crucial to pause and reassess our parenting approach. Are we truly fulfilling our roles as parents first and foremost, rather than trying to be their best friends? Perhaps it's time to recalibrate our methods. Let's start first by prioritizing quality family time without distractions like our phones. By creating these moments of genuine connection, we can strengthen our bonds and provide the stable foundation our children need to thrive. To gain more guidance from Dr. Sax's incredible parenting tools, I highly recommend that you all check out his 4 incredible books. Dr. Sax, thank you so much for being my guest on Female Fluence today. Is there anything else you would like to share with us?
Well, just one last thought. A few tips. I encourage parents: no earbuds, no headsets in the car. When you're in the car, your kids should be listening to you, not to Cardi B or Megan Thee Stallion. and no phones in the bedroom. At 9 o'clock at night, the very latest, you take the device from your kid, you shut it off, you put it in the charger, which from now on is going to be the parents' bedroom. You have to take this action. It's not age appropriate to let your 12-year-old or your 16-year-old decide whether to have a phone in the bedroom when her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight, how come you didn't answer? It's not reasonable to expect a teenage girl to say, well, researchers have found that sleep deprivation in adolescence is a major risk factor for the etiology of anxiety and depression. You have to allow her to say, my evil parents take my phone every night at 9, won't have it back till the next morning. You have to find the courage to do the right thing.
I love that. Thank you so much for leaving that with us. All the links will be in my show notes. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Thank you everyone for tuning in today to Female Fluence. Together we can influence and motivate other mind-like females. Your job is to feel alive, be in control, and always be true to your own self. Please don't forget to subscribe so you can continue feeling inspired. All the links and notes from this episode will be posted on my website, femalefluence.com. Don't forget to also follow me at Female Fluence on both Instagram and Facebook. Lastly, if you are in need of a woman empowerment life coach to help you identify the barriers that keep you from living the life you seek, please send an email to info@femalefluence.org. Remember, my friends, don't just exist, but live your life to the fullest. I'm your host, Pearl Mashur. Until we talk next time.